Okay, so you're going to pick up a U-Haul. Is that the deal?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
You're moving on up. Actually, you're moving on down from the skyrise apartment in the sky in downtown Austin.
Don't remind me, Russ. Don't remind me. Thank you for the reminder.
You're moving down, but only vertically, not lifestyle-wise, because you were moving to my old building in Austin, which I really, out of all the places I've lived, which have been dozens now in my life, that apartment building was maybe my favorite.
That's high standards right there. We'll see. I have a few favorites, and I'm not. Well, I hope it comes anywhere close to my favorite. My favorite. You know what my favorite is. What was my favorite, Russ?
Is it the Trump building on the Upper West Side?
That was a good one, but no.
What's your favorite? Oh, 60 Water in Brooklyn.
660 Water.
Speaking
60
of
Water.
the New York and the Trump building on the Upper West Side, you know, the podcast has really taken off. This has even surprised me how popular we've gotten and how quickly that's happened. For those who go back with us, you now know that this is our second episode. And John, the guy's busy, so I can't even believe he did this. Getting shot, he's always on the plane, he's always drinking the Diet Cokes. But check this out.
You're looking at the Circle Forward podcast. It is, there's lots of podcasts out there. Some of them good, some of them are terrible, quite frankly. But these guys, John Katz, Russ Briscoe, I'm telling you folks, tremendous. It is a tri-weekly conversation where they're talking about the good, the bad, the triumphant, and the downright deplorable, quite frankly. But these guys are telling you one of a kind. You're going to love it.
Hey, you think
how did he have time for that? How did he have time for that?
I don't know.
They're going to be doing huge things. They're going to make podcasting great again, I'm telling you.
My understanding is that is starting to kind of become a campaign slogan now.
Yeah, making podcasts great again.
Make podcasting great again.
Yeah.
One
episode
at
a
all
time.
The liberal woke agenda on the podcasts. So anyway,
I love woke agenda. I love that stuff.
I do know that, and that's certainly behind your move. It's behind really all your moves.
everything I do is driven by that.
Well, you're busy. I'm busy. What can I say? It's Hell's Front Porch here in South Florida. It's hot. I'm wearing these ridiculous fishing shirts everywhere I go, trying to capture any coolness, any breeze. But we are in the dog days of summer. I feel that the entire continent of Europe isn't working right now. And for those clients who we're at least working with, there's been vacations, there's been, hey, we'll get to this. There's been everything, right? Like, we'll get back to you when we get back to you. What's been going on?
Yeah, I mean, they're just taking off. It's summer, but we're still working. We're still grinding. We were just in Europe, grinding away.
Don't tell them that. Don't tell them that we were on vacation.
we were working the whole time.
That's true.
We couldn't get away from our screens.
That's true. We were working. You were logging 5-7 hours a day on the phone. I was a little step down from that. But it was a good kind of laboratory exercise of like taking the business on the road and getting stuff done still. I feel that what we've been talking about, I think is going to be pretty interesting to continue to talk about in this format anyway, which is really productifying what we're doing to make it easier to not have hands on the wheel and to, make it easier ultimately to take some time off. Because productifying the executive advisory and the fractional leadership that we provide to companies systematizes it, right? And makes it a little less, everything's a custom cut, right? So from that vantage, I think that's an interesting thing we can talk about. Like, why it's hard for executives to leave for vacation is their house is out of order, right?
Yeah, I mean, business management systems create accountability for the organization. They create aligned vision, mission, purpose, so people can focus on their job when and still execute and still be effective when the leaders are out. I think it's critically important. Without it, I've seen companies and CEOs where they can't take breaks, right? Because they're constantly in the weeds. But when that system is in place, the engine still goes, right? And leaders are able to take a step back.
Yeah, that's right. When you're growing a startup, it's like, we remember this from back in the days with Build. If anyone were to take time off, it would show up in the numbers, right? And the quicker
That was early on.
That was early
Yeah.
on, yeah, and honest, and that's not a knock at Build at all. That is standard operating for your sub 15, 20 person seed, high growth company. But the quicker you can grow out of the criticality of any one person or one seat, the better it is for the stakeholders, including the customers, right? And I just think it's been interesting how, from our position, speaking for you, but from my position, and I'm sure you'd agree, us working with clients going through the August, I'm taking time off, does it show up in their numbers? Right? Like the answer
We
is
see it. Yeah, we see it. And it's funny because the CEOs, the owners of these businesses, they want to. There's this tough dynamic because they want to make sure that their employees get time off, are able to take care of themselves mentally, physically, stay motivated within the business. They know that they're hustling and they need that time off, but at the same time, they're nervous it's going to impact the business, which they're right, it will. And so, how do you set up a system and a company where when people take time off, it's not impacting the bottom line of the business?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's more than just and I've seen this in sales forever, like the bullshit, like backup culture, like I'll back you up or whatever. It's more than human kind of plug in for. I think a right system really hitches around visibility, data integrity, right? I think it has to do with shared expectations, right person, right seat type alignment. And the second thing that I think is interesting to use this time as a bit of a petri dish for is the business systems management that we've seen in the marketplace operating, right? Like EOS, entrepreneurial operating system, OKRs, scale up, all that jazz. I don't think any single one of them nail it.
No, I think one of the challenges is the stage of the business. I don't think type of business matters. I haven't seen that hasn't mattered. I do think that there's issues with structure around those different business management systems when it comes to stage and speed at which companies want to move. I've seen the systems slow leadership teams down because of the kind of quarterly cadence that a lot of those are on.
That's with EOS.
No, I don't. They're all really quarterly cadences.
Even OKR?
From what I've seen.
OKR
yeah.
Is it quarterly?
No, they're still quarterly. They work off of quarterly kind of. I won't call them sprints because that's more of a system for individual departments to get things done. You work on your sprint cycles, but I think from a company objective initiative perspective, they work on quarterly sprints. And my personal preference is still EOS. Looking and diving deep into scale up and OKRs. I think the big thing that differentiates EOS from the others is the heavy emphasis on solving issues.
Yeah.
So they're all strategic. They all have a strategic element to them. They all focus on, big picture kind of mission, vision, annual goals, things like that. But the thing I really like about EOS is the emphasis on issues and the solving of issues, because when you're flying the plane, there's always going to be turbulence and you constantly have to be making tweaks to the plane as you're going up.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you. I think encouraging people to dialogue and have a fight about it is healthy in a organization that doesn't have standard operating procedures yet kind of hammer tinned in place.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
What
because
other
everyone's
issues?
agreeing about everything. That's like, my whole thing with that article. I can dig it up here probably in a minute. Like, I'm real sensitive to the culture of agreeing for the sake of like nicety. And this
Mm-hmm.
business article from forever and a day ago talks really well about that. It's the Abilene paradox, where a lot of
Yep.
executive teams will agree publicly and then privately run off and build their little kingdoms, their silos, or backstab. So I love how EOS frameworks. Hey, this is a session where we're going to talk about issues and cultivate a methodology to facilitate disagreement.
Yeah, but that only does work if you have right person, right seat, and core values that align. So, which is all an EOS framework, right? You could
Yeah.
have the wrong people in the wrong seat or a untrustworthy leadership team, and you're not going to actually get to the root cause of issues because no one's going to trust each other. They know that there's backstabbing going on. And so that I think that's foundational. Foundational to a successful implementation is trust within the leadership team, respect across the leadership team. You all have to respect each other and each other's opinions. You have to know that it's not personal, it's business. And so when you start to disagree, it's not because I don't like you, it's because this is what I think is best for the business. And I think core values are critically important. If there's people on the team that don't align with the core values of the company, I think you're going to see that show up negatively in issue solving, in
Yeah.
long-term strategic planning, and really alignment with the leadership team.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's so hard.
Russ, what do you think are some of the issues with the existing business management systems? Where do you think they fall short?
That's a good question. I think none of them are specifically built for, I'll say, technology startups that are high growth, that are in the world to grow and scale quickly to return value to investors. I think that there's a real fall short in terms of the implementation. I think EOS and scale up and that stuff, it's hard to implement them. It's hard for teams to figure out how to get with the programming, and I don't think a single one of them recognizes how a typical CEO thinks. So I think that they were built as products, not for a customer. I think they were built a little too academically, not understanding really how and I'm saying CEO specifically, right? So that's like root stuff for me. Like, it falls short because it's not tailored to a high growth technology startup. And also, it's hard for a CEO typically to get his or her head around it and drive the implementation.
Yeah.
So that's root. And then there's
Yeah.
offshoots of that.
I see what you're saying. The implementation is very challenging. It's uncomfortable, which I think is an okay thing. I actually don't think that that's a problem. I think it's a muscle that has to be worked to do it right. It's not one of those things where you should be able to implement it easily. I think it takes work to do well. I think speed and agility, and maybe I'm going to paraphrase what you're saying here, speed and agility for an early stage company that should not be working on 4 cycles throughout the year. They should be working on 12 cycles throughout the year,
That I
or
agree too.
24 cycles throughout the year, I think is part of the issue with some of these, and the rigidity to them causes friction and a little unrest at the CEO from the
Yeah,
CEO,
that
right?
the failing in speed and agility, I think, is symptom of core issue. Core issue being this business management system was not built for high growth startups. And a symptom of that is look at how rigid it is, where it considers the year in 4 parts. What startup pre-revenue thinks about the year in 4 parts? Or even, sub 5 mil ARR,
Yeah.
like, so I totally agree. Yeah. And there's others to that,
The other thing that I see as a challenge is different stages of the business require different strategy and different oversight. Now, what I mean by that is in EOS, they talk a lot about people. There's a whole people section, but I don't think there's a good framework for building culture.
Yeah.
I don't love now you could argue that just getting right person in right seat with mission and vision is what drives the culture. And that's possible. And you could make that argument. But what I haven't seen is a framework because I think to scale a business successfully from 10 to 50 employees and then 50 to 200 employees, your culture has to scale. And you have to have a very intentional effort to craft that culture. And it's not just, it is partly who's in the right person, right seat, but what is the framework for systematizing a right culture? And I don't think that exists.
It's such a great point. The culture, and this is not my own thinking. We've talked about this. You've seen and heard this too. Like, culture is the only thing that matters, right? Like, really, when everything falls away,
it is.
Like, that is what makes a company successful and keeps the company in sustained success. Is the culture. And if we want to define what culture is the vibration shared of people working together that accentuates the output. That's just one hack definition. I don't know. Maybe there's others. I'm sure there are, right?
That was a pretty good hacked one right off the top of your head, unless you've thought about that before.
This is why I make all the money around here.
It's quality. It's quality. But yeah, I agree. I think you could have a great strategy. You could have the right system of accountability. But if you have a shitty culture,
it doesn't matter.
It all falls apart. Yeah. Now, I will also argue the flip side of that. If you have a great culture with a shitty strategy, you got to have probably 2 out of the 3. I'm going to say you need to have either accountability and execution or strategy. You kind of need all 3. But I think culture is the number 1. I'm saying culture is number 1. If you don't have the culture, it's all going to fall apart. That's my take.
I think I disagree a little bit, or I'm thinking about it differently. I don't think you can have a great culture if you don't have a great strategy and right product market fit. I think that
that's a fair statement. I agree with that.
There would have to be some like propaganda or some real unethical or non-competitive kind of sheen over the business where
let me ask you this though.
Right.
Let me ask you this though. You're obviously lumping the mission and vision into the strategy.
Yes.
And I think that is accurate. Generally speaking, you would lump the mission vision into the strategy. But what if you have a very inspirational, aspirational mission? You have a vision, but your strategy for getting there, here's the way we're going to get there, because you still need to know, okay, we want to go all the way up there, but how are we going to get there, right? What route are we taking? What if that is wrong, but you still have this very inspirational, aspirational mission that people can get behind in the organization? And it's something that all the employees care about, right? Yeah. They join the company partly because of that mission and vision, but maybe the strategy is actually wrong.
What happens is they leave. What happens is the culture goes to shit. Their dreams and aspirations and inspiration get spoiled because the team starts losing. Because the tactical strategy is setting the team up to fail. And the human condition is that if we start taking L's, left, right, center, up, down, the culture goes to hell. Right? Like, I just think that.
Yeah, it's a 3-part system, and I think I totally agree with you. And what I think is missing is a lot of these systems have the strategy part, they have the execution and accountability part, and I think they don't include really the culture part. I think the closest one is EOS with the people. They all have people. I believe Scale Up has people as one core pillar.
OKRs doesn't really. They have
OKRs does,
transparency, you know.
OKRs does not have a people section. It is alignment. OKRs is around alignment towards a vision and a mission, and towards I think it is about transparency of the OKRs, of the objectives and key results. Everyone should be very clear on what those are, but I don't think there's an emphasis in OKRs on people in the organization or culture.
You're right. The big thing is like culture is more than Friday afternoon pizza parties, right? Culture is more than wacky shirt Wednesday. I think what a lot of CEOs that I've mixed with ask is, okay, I get it. Everything's downstream from culture. I understand. Culture is culture is culture, right? How do I build it?
That's the money question right there.
Right? Like, here's the thing. I think you can't build it. I think it has to be built by the people who are in it. And that may be why EOS takes their tact of just emphasizing people and not culture. You can't build a national identity, for example. You know, the United States culture we have here, for example, has hundreds of years of influence factors to it, really beginning like 1066 with the Norman invasion of England, or maybe even before that, right? Like, what was the date of the John, you're putting me on the spot.
Yeah, that was my goal.
What was the date of the Magna Carta? 1216?
You're asking. I do know my history, but I don't know that answer.
Yeah. So any which way, this is all part of the American civic culture.
1215. You said 1216.
I got it off by 1 year, John. Come on.
You're way off. Way off.
You got to go back to school.
Yeah. That degree you got is, I don't know what, you don't deserve it.
Worthless paper.
Worthless.
But anyway, don't you think the American civic culture and just, what generally goes on around here is 800 years old?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, culture, that's the challenge is at a company, at an early stage company, there is no culture. It's a blank slate, and it does get built really by the founders.
It's the founder.
Right? I mean, the founder drives the culture, and they have to be very, very diligent and know that everything that they do and say and how they run the business early on, even when it's 1 or 2 people, is starting to build the culture. Because to your point, 800 years later, America has a culture. It came from everything that happened before it, right? And everything kind of builds upon each other. So how early is a CEO or a founder or founding team thinking about culture? They're probably not thinking about it early on.
I know.
And is that wrong? Maybe not. I'm not sure. I haven't decided yet, because they need to build product market fit, right? If you're thinking about culture and you don't even have product market fit, you got to go get customers. You got to know if what you're doing is solving an actual customer need. But foundationally, if you're planning to scale the business at any point, everything you're doing today will impact the culture tomorrow.
I think we can put artifacts of culture in place proactively that the garden can grow with and around. Say you're building a garden. You can put the walls in. You can lay the dirt paths. You can put beautiful Zen Japanese stones around. But then the people come, and those are the growth around those things. And all makes the garden, all makes the culture. So I think that the walls and the path and the rocks are things like the core values around here are this. We're going to agree to this group of myths, or these early days stories are what we're going to tell each other and tell everyone and tell them often and tell them loudly, right? Like, do you know our first customer had this issue and then that happened and then he did this and we did that and this was the result? You got to tell that story all the time to everyone. That becomes the artifacts of the culture, and even the physical footprint of the space you work in.
Yeah.
You know, like, let me tell you, it's hard to do it over Zoom, right? It's even harder over this junk Riverside, right?
You're blurry. You've been blurry this whole time.
So
am I blurry on you? I'm blurry on your end? So you're blurry on my end.
I don't know how these Riverside scammers get away with this. This is all uploading and buffering and whatever. But anyway, I'm in the middle of my boring ass speech that no one wants to hear. You can proactively put these artifacts in place to have the culture grow up around. I think that's the best you can do.
Yeah, I think that's one component. There's the actual chiseling away of creating the culture and laying those rocks, if you will. But then there's examples, right? There's the example that the founders set, right? With their work ethic, who they are, their willingness to help take accountability for their own mistakes. There's things that they are doing that will also drive, in many ways, maybe even more so than the things that we were just talking about, the culture, right? And I think those are things that founders need to be aware of very early on, how they communicate and talk to their employees. When their first early employees make a mistake, when their first early employees do something phenomenally, when they personally make a mistake, or when they personally have a huge win. Are they celebrating their own win, or are they celebrating the company win?
Right.
Just little things like that, whether they say we or I in a meeting.
Correct.
We just raised money, or I was able to go get a meeting with this person. Small things like that in the early stages, I think really set the foundation for the culture.
You're right. I think too, and I've seen this at companies, you probably have too, you gotta fire people like really unequivocally and quickly in the early days who are not good culture. Because if you don't, the exponential impact that person's culture has on the growth of the organization's culture is hard to control later. If someone's a bad culture person and on the first 12, 20 people, do not give that person too much rope because he or she is early days. You got to fire that person with purpose, because the culture that's going to grow up around that person hurts.
I agree.
I've definitely seen where early people were bad culture, and that bad culture reverberated because they hung around because they were early.
Very, very true.
You know, I also would say this is a hot shot alert or whatever. Tribalism is not culture, right? I think like picking out innate or immutable, unchangeable characteristics around people and ascribing that characteristic as culture is dangerous and just stupid, you know?
Yeah. Do you have examples of that?
Yeah, like, and this is a thing, right? Like, this is a thing where I've heard, you know, maybe you've heard, but you can read, it's out there in the world. Like, we need to have diversity on this team because the board is saying that they want diversity because of either optics or, you know, heartfelt right thinking or the ability to placate or advance investor relations efforts, we need our team to be meaningfully, diversely represented, right? Fine, fair play, okay? Like, I'm not the white guy that's against diversity. But here's what I would say. Don't confuse that for culture. Like, just going out and hiring purposefully for diversity is not culture. That's a business tactic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
And I'm not against going out and hiring purposefully for diversity. But I do have a problem with the thinking that because a diverse person has come into the room, he or she is bringing something different to our culture.
Mm-hmm.
That, to me, in its own way, bigoted and racist, I think.
Yeah. I mean, culture may or may, I mean, it depends on what the founder wants. If the culture that the founder wants is just a very diverse set of people, sure, maybe that's what it is. I think of culture more as the qualities of the person, right? The qualities of the individual. So when I think of crafting core values that lead to partly the culture of the business, it's are they hardworking? Are they honest? These types of things. And if that's a diverse hire, wonderful. If it's, but to your point, it's not, that doesn't create the culture.
Right. And I just think a lot of companies, why I'm bringing it up, is they confuse that. They look at their culture.
Actually, it does create culture. Is it creating the culture you want? Everything you do creates culture, right? And so every single move you make has an impact on culture. Is it impacting the culture in a positive way or a negative way? And that's what you have to ask yourself, because everything you do does touch culture. Right?
Actually, only up until a point, I would say. After you get beyond a certain point, the culture is sort of like impervious to certain maneuvers. It just exists.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
But
at an early stage company building it still.
For sure. What you're saying then is totally right. Everything you do does impact the culture at an early stage company who is still kind of building into that. But you can't impact the culture of IBM.
Yeah.
In mass anyway. Maybe they have small silo companies or whatever. But I don't know. I think that there's definitely to go all the way back to where we started with this. I think there's definitely an absence of any of these business management systems accounting for the weight and importance of culture in the early phase growth of startups. And just kind of shingle hanging around people is not enough. And just kind of like saying, well, hey, strategy, and upstream from that, there's going to be these core values is also not enough. There has to be a mechanism for actively building that garden. C'est la vie. Any parting shots, John?
No, I think we said it all, Russ.
Said it all. All right. Well, I'm going to try and get your favorite presidential candidate, Kamala Harris, on the phone and get a statement from her around our podcast, so we can maybe open the next show with that. My understanding is
I don't want to get into politics, and I also don't want anyone thinking I support either of the two. Because I don't share my politics too often, right, Russ? So
I thought you were a huge Kamala person. Well, anyway, my understanding is that she's taking a lot of questions these days, so I should have no problem getting her on the phone for a question. So
yeah, she's taking a lot all day, every day.
Yeah. Okay. See ya.
See you, buddy.